There are things inside us that don't scream. They whisper. But even so, they shake everything. Sometimes it shows up as a strange discomfort in the middle of your day, a soft sadness you can't explain, a tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, or that sudden irritation with someone for no clear reason. You try to move on, pretend everything's fine, but something inside won't settle. Maybe that's your shadow saying hi, not with words, but with symptoms, not with logic, but with sensations, not to scare you, but to remind you of something you tried to forget. The shadow, as Carl Jung described it, is everything we were taught not to be. It's the silenced desire, the swallowed anger, the held-back impulse. It's power mistaken for flaw. It's truth, dressed up as shame. And when it says hi, it's not trying to break you. It's trying to come home. This video isn't about fighting your shadow. It's about listening to what it's trying to say. Because every time it shows up, in a dream, in a sudden overreaction, in an unexplained emptiness, it's trying to open a path back to something in you that got left behind. And maybe you don't know where to start. That's okay, because the beginning has already begun. It starts the moment you stop and ask, what is this pain trying to tell me? That's where your journey back to yourself begins. And the shadow, it just wants to walk with you. Hi, I'm Noah. This video isn't some big Hollywood production. It's just a way I found to share with you what I learned about myself today through what I've been learning from Carl Jung. Because maybe the moment I'm living through feels a lot like something you're living too. So if something I say here helps you feel a little less alone, just give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, YouTube understands that this kind of content matters to you, and it'll start showing you more of it. There are moments when it feels like something inside you is trying to speak, even in the silence. It's not noise, not a thought. It's more like a subtle ache in your psyche, an invisible weight in your chest, as if something's off, but you can't quite name it. And no matter how much you distract yourself, it lingers. Because it's not just tiredness, not just routine. It's the shadow, gently knocking, trying to return from the forgotten corners of your personal unconscious. Sometimes this calling shows up as patterns that repeat. The same mistake, the same fall, the same silence where you needed a voice. Other times, it feels like a quiet dissatisfaction with your life, even when everything looks okay. That's the shadow beginning to stir. It doesn't yell, it whispers. Through dreams, through unexplained impulses, through symbols hidden in your emotions. The psyche has its own way of asking for rescue, and that way is rarely loud. This hi from the shadow is the beginning of shadow work. It's the start of an inner journey that doesn't begin by choice, but by necessity, because your psyche can't bear to live split any longer. What feels like absence is actually a symbolic presence, the return of the parts of you that were left behind, the ones that feel, desire, fear, and long to live fully. This is the moment you stop resisting the discomfort and begin to make the unconscious conscious. At first, it feels like you're falling apart. But you're not. You're opening. You're seeing. You're beginning a symbolic process of becoming whole again. And that takes courage, because seeing what lives within you without a mask isn't easy. But it's not a punishment. It's the first step toward remembering who you are, beyond the persona, beyond survival mode, beyond what you were taught to pretend. The shadow never meant to hurt you. It just wants to come home. It wants you to stop living in halves, to stop labeling as problems the parts of you that only wanted to be seen, held, loved, parts of you that still breathe under the silence. Maybe you're in that place now, feeling a sadness with no name, an emptiness that won't go away, a longing you can't explain. That's you, remembering, and your shadow, waiting to be remembered. You're not losing control. You're beginning to listen. And that listening is individuation. It's the beginning of healing, the beginning of coming home to yourself. There are days when you explode over nothing, or go quiet when you most needed to speak. It feels like your whole body is carrying a tension that doesn't have a name. Your heart races, your stomach tightens, your head feels heavy, and you try to stay in control. But something inside you moves faster than thought. It acts on impulse. And afterward comes guilt, regret. That question, why am I like this? But maybe that question is upside down. Maybe it's not why are you like this, but what are you trying so hard to silence? Every time the shadow is ignored, it finds another way to appear. And it does, through unconscious impulses that take over the wheel, through repressed emotions that spill out in the middle of a conversation, through disowned traits that show up as unconscious behavior. You feel anger and don't know why. You feel shame just for feeling. You sabotage yourself right when things were finally starting to work. It's like one part of you keeps tripping the other, but it's not sabotage out of malice. It's your psyche trying to survive psychological repression. It's your soul trying to say, there are too many locked away parts inside me that are begging to be heard. The ignored shadow doesn't disappear. It slips through the cracks. And as Carl Jung once said, what is not made, conscious returns as fate. Every inner conflict, every repeating pattern, every moment of feeling inadequate could be a long overdue high from a wound that's been silent for too long. You're not broken. You're just holding up a structure that no longer fits who you are. And that discomfort, it's just how the shadow gets your attention. Not as punishment, as hope. Because if it still hurts, it still exists. It still breathes. It still wants to heal. And healing begins when you stop calling weakness what is actually truth. Stuck, but alive. No one taught you how to listen to what you feel. They only taught you how to look strong, productive, steady. But the shadow doesn't like to be ignored for long. It starts showing up in the body, in your reactions, in those heavy silences. Whatever is rejected seeks return, and every return brings discomfort, but also direction. Maybe the things you call your flaws are just parts of you trying to survive being pushed away. And maybe, just maybe, they're asking to come back, not to harm you, but to make you whole. Some people throw you off just by speaking. Some irritate you effortlessly. Some seem to carry everything you most despise or secretly envy. And you react. You attack. You avoid. Or you pretend it doesn't bother you, but it does. It really does. And afterward, you find yourself asking, why does this person affect me so much? The answer might not be in them. It might be in you. Or more precisely, in the part of you you still can't fully see. When the shadow is too hard to face directly, it hides in the other. Carl Jung called this projection, a mechanism of the unconscious that pushes what we reject onto someone else, so we can see it without recognizing it as ours. The anger you feel towards someone might be the anger you were never allowed to feel. The disgust might be fear in disguise. The obsession, a nameless desire. When the personal shadow is ignored, it can become collective shadow, spreading between people as if it belongs to no one. It's not easy to see this. The ego doesn't like looking into the mirror, especially when the reflection reveals what it swore it wasn't. But this mirror is exactly where the psyche invites you to look, because the person who triggers you might just be playing the role of the part you exiled from yourself, the part you buried to fit in, the part that still breathes beneath the silence, the part that wants to come back. Projection is like a reversed lens. It shows you what's inside by pretending it's outside. And as long as you don't see it, the pain grows, patterns repeat, triggers multiply, and you keep thinking the problem is them, but they are just the messenger. The mirror, a reflection of unconscious content that needs to be seen so it can stop hurting. That doesn't mean everything from outside is your fault. And it doesn't mean you should tolerate abuse or stay in toxic dynamics. but it does mean that some of what disturbs you might be pointing towards something forgotten within, a repressed trait, an unlived impulse, an emotion you were taught to hide. And if you feel like going a little deeper, I carefully prepared a gift for you. It may look small on the outside, but it goes deep. It was made for those quiet moments when you suddenly notice you're here, but not really present. You're breathing, but not really alive. Inside, you won't find answers or fixes, but you might find a way back. Back to the parts of you that got left behind. Back to the gentle voice you stopped listening to. Back to your true self. The one that still remembers who you are. Not a better version of yourself. Not a new version of yourself. Just a whole version of yourself. You'll find the link to your gift right there in the pinned comment. So, if your soul is tired of moving through life without really feeling it, if your soul is tired of waking up and not knowing why, click the link now. When you start to make the unconscious conscious, the projections lose their grip, and what used to be an attack becomes a question. What used to be judgment becomes listening. You don't need to blame yourself for projecting. Everyone does it. The question is, what do you do once you notice it? Do you run? Or do you ask, what is this trying to show me about myself? That's where individuation begins. It's when you stop chasing villains and start looking for wholeness. The shadow speaks too, but in a different way. It doesn't use clear words or logical arguments. It speaks in symbols, through images that show up in your dreams and won't leave you alone. Sometimes it takes the form of an animal chasing you, an old house, a dark forest, a wounded child. Sometimes it's a figure that keeps returning, even without a face. In Jungian psychology, these aren't coincidences. They are archetypal images carrying unconscious content that the mind alone can't access. Carl Jung said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and when we ignore those symbols, we drift away from the soul. Because the shadow is both body and image, it feels and it reveals. It doesn't explain itself, it shows up. It may come in a symbolic dream, in a drawing you make without thinking, in a strong intuition that makes no rational sense. Each of these signs is your psyche trying to express itself, trying to open a path toward what was lost, toward what needs to return and be integrated. There are things you can't name, but you feel them in your chest, in your skin, in your bones. It's as if something inside you is speaking through images because it can no longer survive through logic alone. Active imagination is one way to listen, a gentle way to let the shadow move, reveal itself, and speak. You don't need to understand everything intellectually. What matters is presence. What matters is your willingness to feel. Because when you welcome the symbol, it begins to speak. Archetypes aren't just old ideas, they're living figures within the psyche. When you dream of the wild woman, the wise old man, or the forgotten child, it's not random. These are parts of you asking to return. Archetypal figures carry memories from the collective unconscious, yet they speak directly to your personal story. They are bridges between what was lost and what longs to be found. They are symbols of the self in motion. Unconscious communication happens even when you're not aware of it. A recurring symbol, a familiar landscape in a dream, a sensation that always shows up at certain moments. All of these are signals, invitations, the shadow trying to remind you of who you are. And if you listen with your body, not with the rush to understand, but with the softness to feel, you'll begin to see that these symbols have their own kind of beauty, a kind of poetry that lives not in words, but in silence. The shadow is not a puzzle to be solved. It's a language to be felt. It's part of your symbolic process of healing, part of your inner journey. And when you begin to look at it without fear, it stops being frightening, because it was never your enemy. It was forgotten language. It was your soul, whispering. There are days when you feel like you're just playing a role. You smile, say what people expect, act like everything's fine, but inside, something feels missing, a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from your body, but from your soul, a weight that isn't physical, but emotional. And you try to figure out where this tiredness is coming from, but no clear answer comes. Maybe it's because the answer is hiding in a place you were taught to bury. The pain of not being allowed to be yourself. The persona, as Carl Jung described it, is the mask we wear to interact with the world. It's not a lie, it's a function, a social agreement, a way to belong. The problem begins when the mask becomes your entire identity, when the role you learn to play matters more than who you truly are. And slowly, your authentic emotions get repressed. Your natural traits get silenced. Your real joy gets suffocated, and the shadow starts forming as a living archive of everything you had to hide in order to be accepted. That's how the ego-shadow conflict begins. The ego wants to stick with the character because it works, it pleases, it protects. But the shadow wants truth. It wants space. It wants to live. And this inner tension starts to hurt because living only through the persona is living halfway. It means accepting a fragmented identity where only what is nice or acceptable is allowed to be seen. And the rest turns into silence, into symptoms, into fatigue, into isolation. This psychological repression creates guilt. It creates shame. It makes you question whether your real feelings are even valid, or whether it's safer to just keep hiding. But hiding wears you down. Hiding makes you sick. And little by little, what you've repressed begins to push through. Not with words, but with impulses, with emotional crashes, with that persistent emptiness that shows up at the end of the day. The shadow is not a problem to be fixed. It's a call to be heard. Maybe you've learned how to appear strong, smart, stable, but have you learned how to be real? The persona doesn't need to be destroyed, but it needs to be put in its rightful place. It's a bridge, not a destination. And when you begin to recognize what you left behind, the shadow stops being a threat and starts becoming a path back to your psychic wholeness. You are not just what the world sees. You are what you feel when no one's watching, what you long for, what you've hidden, even from yourself. And that's exactly where your truest self lives. The shadow is made of this, of everything denied that still pulses inside. And when you finally have the courage to listen, it leads you home. There are parts of you that don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be improved, erased, or outgrown. They just want to be heard. And I know how hard that is to accept. We were raised to believe that every pain needs a solution, that every flaw needs to be corrected, that whatever feels wrong should be left behind. But the shadow doesn't work like that. It doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. It doesn't want to be conquered. It wants to be seen. When you approach the shadow without judgment, something inside you begins to shift. It's not loud. It's not immediate, but it's real. It's as if the parts that were locked away start to trust again. As if the repressed emotions, the hidden impulses, the exiled pieces of yourself begin to return. Carl Jung called this the transcendent function, the moment in the psyche when inner opposites stop fighting and start speaking. And for that conversation to happen, you have to listen. Not with urgency, but with presence. Symbolic listening is where reconnection begins. When you stop saying, "This shouldn't be here," and instead ask, "Why is this here?" That's when the shadow stops feeling like a monster and starts feeling like a memory. It stops being a threat and starts becoming a bridge. Because every impulse you tried to deny, every emotion you've hidden, every part you've judged as wrong, simply wanted a place to exist. And when you offer that place, the shadow no longer has to scream. You don't have to fix everything at once. The shadow isn't in a rush. It just needs to know that you're willing to listen. And listening, truly listening, is harder than it sounds. It means staying with what arises, without judging, without fixing, without rushing to explain, listening the way you'd hold a child in your arms, not to speak, but simply to stay. That kind of presence is what transforms isolation into connection and pain into care. To integrate the shadow is to let what was exiled come home, not as a mistake, but as a rightful part of your psychic wholeness. There's no perfect ritual for this, no quick answer, just relationship, just space, just a silence that welcomes. The shadow doesn't integrate by force. It integrates when it realizes it no longer has to hide. Maybe today is the day to sit with a part of you that's been silent for years. Maybe it won't speak at first. Maybe it just breathes, just cries, just sits nearby, and that's okay. What matters most is that it's no longer alone, and that you no longer have to leave yourself behind to feel whole. Integrating the shadow isn't about winning a battle. It's about opening your arms to the parts of yourself you tried to forget. It's not about erasing the past or removing what feels ugly. It's about saying, "I see you," to everything that's ever been pushed away inside. And when you do that, truly do that, something changes. The weight on your chest lifts. The tension in your body softens. It's like your soul breathes for the first time in years, because all the shadow ever wanted was to come home. This return doesn't happen all at once. It's a symbolic process, slow and subtle, like building a bridge between ego and shadow. With every act of listening, every allowed impulse, every emotion met with care, the bridge becomes more solid. The ego starts to realize it no longer has to be in control of everything. And the psyche finds a new kind of balance, not one based on perfection, but on presence. That's when shadow work becomes integration. Carl Jung said the self is the living totality of the psyche, and the shadow is one of its hidden doors. When you welcome your personal shadow, you move closer to your most authentic self. The shadow was never a mistake. It was exiled potential. It was instinct, creativity, longing, truth, all locked away by fear, shame, or conditioning. Integrating the shadow means making peace with all of it, letting what once felt ugly reveal its hidden beauty. This emotional integration isn't an ending, it's a beginning. You start to feel more whole, less split. You realize you no longer need to hide parts of yourself to be loved, and that changes everything. It changes how you see yourself, how you relate, how you live, because the shadow is no longer lurking in the dark. It's beside you now, within you. Integrated, inner alchemy happens when what once felt like conflict becomes creation, when what seemed like weakness turns into sensitive strength, when the things you feared begin to teach you. It doesn't happen in a day, but it begins the moment you stop dividing yourself from within and start gathering yourself back together. To integrate the shadow is to remember, you were never just a half. You were just far from yourself, and now you're coming home. When the shadow is integrated, it stops being an enemy and starts becoming a guide. It doesn't disappear, but it changes position. What once showed up as sabotage or fear now shows up as expressive force, creative impulse, and emotional truth. You stop living in defense of what you feel and start living from what you feel. Once embraced, the shadow becomes a powerful ally because it holds parts of you that the ego alone could never reach. Carl Jung said that individuation happens when the ego aligns with the self, and that only becomes possible when the shadow is no longer cast out. The psyche finds peace when it no longer has to hide its own pieces. The personal shadow, once integrated, gives you back the freedom to exist without constantly needing approval. You no longer live to please. You live to hear yourself. And that changes everything. The way you relate, create, move through the world. This kind of freedom isn't loud. It's quiet and steady. It's the courage to say no when everyone expects a yes. It's the presence of someone who no longer needs to pretend. It's the comfort of feeling your body as home again. The Psyche-soma connection is restored, and what once felt like pain becomes root. The shadow stops being a crisis and becomes a compass. Because now, it doesn't need to get your attention through symptoms. It can simply walk beside you as part of who you are. Living with authenticity doesn't mean exposing everything or acting on every impulse. It means acting with truth. It means recognizing what you feel and choosing with awareness. The shadow helps with that. It reminds you of what matters, of what drives you, of what you've spent too long repressing. And when it expresses itself consciously, it becomes art, words, decisions, affection. It becomes a symbolic path back to yourself. Psychological maturity begins when you stop running from who you are. When you understand that being whole doesn't mean being perfect. It means being real, with light and with shadow, with clarity and with contradiction, with the courage to be fully human. And when that happens, life changes, because it finally starts to feel like it's yours. Integrating the shadow isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of your freedom. It's when you realize that what once scared you only ever wanted to walk beside you. And if something I said reminded you of your own story or stirred something inside you, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd really love to hear it. What you have to say matters, not just to me, but maybe to someone else who's going through something similar. Sometimes, putting it into words is already part of the healing. If something inside you still wants to understand yourself, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. And maybe what's in there is exactly what you've been needing to hear. Click it, if that's where your soul is asking to go.